In Israel, Mr. Menashe Amir, a long-time Persian language broadcaster on Israel radio. He is a former head of the Israel Broadcasting Authority's Persian language division, former chief editor of the Foreign Ministry's Persian website. He was born in Tehran and started his journalistic career at the age of 17 with the newspaper Kayan, an evening daily. He immigrated to Israel in 1959, has been working as a journalist and broadcaster for over 55 years, and now close to 60, I believe, broadcasting to Iran for over close to 60 years. He became popular in Israel during the coverage of the 1979 Iran hostage crisis. He founded the Persian version of Israel's Foreign Ministry's website and served as its chief editor. Amir hosts a daily 1.5-hour radio program in Persian. The program includes a call-in portion with Iranian listeners calling. So really it's a pleasure to have Amir with us. And Israel's relations with Iran is one of the important topics in this course, I believe. Anyway, Menashe, welcome to the program.
Good day to everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be with you and to give you some information about Israel-Iran relationship and also to answer your question, which is the main part of my interest. Iran, regarding the coronavirus, is in a very bad position, and there are many reasons for that. Not only Iran was the first country that has been contaminated to the virus, but Iran also exported it to other countries. Almost 16 countries have been contaminated by the Iranian passengers or the Muslim pilgrims that visited the holy city of Qom in Iran. And the reason that Iran is in a very bad situation is that they have covered the fact that they have been contaminated, and also they didn't take any proper measures to prevent it, or at least to make it less and less. And they began to do the annual parade of the independence or the Revolution Day. Tens of thousands people have been participated, and they didn't take any other measure, and that's the reason that the virus have been spread over Iran very fast. I don't believe to the formal statistics that every day is published in Tehran. They speak about 80,000 contaminated and some 4,000 people dead, which I don't believe. I think that the real numbers are 2 or 3 folds more than they declare it. And the other reason that Iran is in a very bad shape in this regard is the fact of the American sanctions, which drained the Iranian money capability, and also you have to add the corruption which is governing Iran, and everybody steals whatever he can, and also the bad management. That's true that coronavirus was an unknown virus and nobody knew how to deal with it, but the Iranians have been worse in this regard. They have arrested doctors and medical assistants for discovering the real number of the dead and contaminated. And Iran today has a very big enigma, as Israel has, and I think that the United States has, and this is how you can manage your economy and at the same time to contain and prevent the spread of the virus. There are no real plans in Iran how to deal with it, and because of the bad shape of the economy, the Iranians have been allowed most of them, to go back to work without regarding any caution for preventing the spread of the virus. I think that there is no need to ease the sanctions for fighting the virus in Iran. Iran has many reserve of money that can use it, and the American government and President Trump believe, and I believe also the same, that if the sanctions will be relieved, then the Iranians will go back very fast and very hard to their actions, the military actions in other countries, and they will drive the money towards missile projects and also the nuclear project. Iran has other sources of money for dealing with the coronavirus. I give you some examples. First of all, if Iran will stop sending money to the terrorist organizations, if Iran will stop its intervention in military actions in Iraq, Syria, and other countries, they will have enough money to deal. There is 2-3 more sources for financing the fight. This is Astan Quds Razavi, which is a holy foundation that is one of the richest in the world. Maybe they have $90 billion of fund and properties. And there are 2 other Iranian revolutionary foundations which are very rich, and they can sell some of their properties and to finance the fight for a virus. About American help of sending medical equipment to Iran, the President Trump's administration has declared many times that the U.S. is ready to send anything needed in Iran, or at least to agree the financement of any project that Iran needs through international organizations, for example, International Money Fund. But the Iranians refused that because they didn't want to show that the Americans can help the Iranian population, and they want to keep on the hate against the United States for very political reasons. So there is no need of lifting the sanctions, and Iran has the money. They have to stop their aggressive actions in the other countries, and then they will have enough money. And the international community is ready to help them, but they refuse because the Revolutionary Guards in Iran wants to show that this is the most important and effective organization which can deal with this problem. But about the financing of fighting coronavirus and the Iranian budget problem, this is a very, very big problem, that the government in Iran doesn't have enough money to finance all the expenses of the country and to provide the needs of the population because of many reasons. You mentioned of the price of oil. That's true. Iran has been selling some 3 million barrels a day during the Shah, and also a little bit after the revolution. And the price was very high. Today, the Iranian oil export is around 150,000 barrels, which is almost nothing. And the prices dropped, and instead of selling it for $60 or $80 a barrel, today Iran sells something around $16, $20, and maybe $22 $2. So there is no real income from selling the oil. And there is another big question, because the main buyer of the Iranian oil is China. And China is not paying Iran cash money or dollars. They give Iran products. And something else, that Iran has to pay $5 billion of money to Chinese company who has a very important oil project in Iran. So to summarize, I can say that from the oil there is almost no income for covering the expenses of the budget. Rouhani asked $1 billion from the Iranian Development Fund to finance the shortage of the budget. It was approved a week ago, but it's not enough to cover. So the main solution is that all these holy foundations, I mentioned their names, will give a part of their properties for financing the current expenses of the government and the people in Iran. The aim of the United States is preventing Iran to get money for financing terrorist and aggressive military actions outside. And once Iran will have the financial capability, they will not expend it for the comfort of the people, but for accelerating their actions, their aggression in the other countries. This is a very big and serious problem in Iran that they have to deal. It may damage the stability of the regime. There is a great possibility in Iran that one day all the people inside the country, those who are hungry, those who are unemployed, those who are against the regime, the women which are very much oppressed in Iran will rise, and they may topple this regime. Now, how it became that two very friendly countries have become two main enemies, one against the other. I would say that the enmity is not from Israel towards Iran, but it's from Iran, the regime in Iran towards Israel. Khomeini, as the leader of the revolution in Iran, he has called always for the destruction of Israel. If you read Khomeini's books before the revolution, he has mentioned very clearly that Jews are very bad people, liars, and they make sabotage, and they are unclean, najis, and the Islam has to fight their influence upon the world. So destroying Israel is a part of the ideological and religious belief of the regime in Iran. And Iran, which is trying to be the leader of the Islamic world, believes that by destroying Israel is paving the way for taking over regions, countries. And there is another tactic reason for the enmity of Iran against Israel. And the tactic reason is that these days that all the Arab countries almost left the Palestinian subject and almost stopped their support to Palestinian wishes, Iran wants to show that they are a better Muslim, a better devoted to Islam, and they took over the support of all the terrorist Palestinian organizations, and Iran is using these organizations, financing them and providing them arms to advance its interest in the Arab countries, to try to topple the actual regimes in the Arab countries, to fight by Houthis in Yemen, to topple the regime in Saudi Arabia, and to use these terrorist actors to take over the leadership of Iraq and to expel the American military forces in Iraq, and so on. to take over the whole region. To summarize, Iran's enmity against Israel has two main reasons. First, the strategic, which means that they are against the existence of Israel. They want to destroy, for paving the way to make an Islamic empire or caliphate all over the region. And the other reason is tactic, to prove to the Palestinians and to the Arab countries that the Islamic Iran is a better Muslim than anybody else. So the Iranian Muslims, the Shiites, have to take over the leadership of the Islamic world. Islam wants to take over the whole world. They say that they didn't come only to govern the Middle East and Arab region. They came to take over the leadership of the whole world. Now, United States as the superpower in economics, politics, military, and other reasons, has a very great obstacle to reaching Iran these aims. So the animosity against the United States is a part of their ideological belief that they have to expel the Americans, they have to neutralize the American influence all over the world, and especially in the Middle East, because the Iranians are very fond of United States. They like very much the American music. They respect the American culture. They want to be a part of Western civilization and culture. And this is very bad for the Iranian regime. So Iran tries to show the United States as the great Satan, which is declining, and by that to pave the way for the taking over of Islam in the region and the world. The relationship between Israel and Iran, the relationship between the two countries, which was also involving the Americans, has been one of the reasons of the enmity of the Iranian regime today against both United States, what you said, the great Satan, and Israel, which is called in Iran the little. And I would say that there is no change of ideology and strategic actions of Iran. Not only remain the same, today is much harder than it has been before. Today the extremism in Iran is much worse than the day that Khomeini was in the government. So there is no any change of ideology or strategy. There is a change of tactics, how they can get their aim. And when you compare today, during Rouhani's government, and if you compare it to 16 years ago during the Khatami regime, you see that today the regime in Iran is much more suppressive, much more extremist, much more fanatic than it has been 4 years ago or 8 years ago or 16 years ago. So it's only a change of tactic and not strategy and not a ideological aim and aspirations. I have to add that all the time in Iran are many camps, mainly two camps, the extremists and those who are looking for the middle way. They are trying to go through tactics, and the other one tries to go to strategy. This discussion between reformists and the other camp has always been existing in Iran. About the protests, yes, there have been many times of protests in Iran during the Ahmadinejad. We remember at least 1 million Iranians went to the streets of Tehran protesting the fake results of the elections. Later on, 3 years ago, we have been witness to protests of other people for difficulties of the existence and providing the food for their families. We have been witness 2 months ago also to another protest after the Ukrainian aircraft or airplane have been crushed in Iran by 2 missiles, that then in 2.5 days the military suppressive revolutionary guards has killed 1,500 Iranians. We have been witness of protests a few weeks ago, and always these protests have been suppressed by the regime, and many people have been killed or arrested and so on. But as I assume, the field for another uprising, a very more serious uprising in Iran, is paved, because there is no money, there is no food, there is no employment, there is suppression, there is embezzlement, there is corruption, and there is terrorist support of the regime for the other organization. It means that Iranians have to give their blood for financing the terrorist actions of the regime outside the country. These are the facts that the Iranians know, that the Iranians are very much against, that the Iranians are trying to fight it. The problem is the suppression is so harsh, and the killing, it may happen something as it has happened in Syria, that during the uprising there have been more than 400,000 people killed. That's the main cause that the Iranians don't dare for the moment to uprise, and this explains why the regime is still existing and continuing its way. But it cannot remain in this situation. The situation in Iran is going to be worse and worse, and there will be a day that all those hungry people or suppressed people, women in Iran, and the middle class, the poor people, will uprise and will try to topple the regime, as it happened during the French Revolution 200 years ago. The ideologic reasons, the religious reasons, and the tactic reasons for enmity of the regime in Iran against Israel has been existing and will remain as long as this regime has not been toppled. This regime exists. Only after the change of regime in Iran, we may have all the reasons for renewing the collaboration and very good and friendly relations between the two countries. I believe that once this regime will topple, it will be the time for reconstruction of Iran. And reconstructing means that Iran needs the Israeli experience, the Israeli readiness to help the Iranian people, and the welcome from the Iranian people to Israel. Even nowadays that the regime in Iran tries to worsen the enmity against Israel and makes a very big propaganda to Iranian people to hate Israel, we see in our broadcasts and our contacts that we have with the people inside Iran that the Iranians don't hate Israel. They don't consider Israel as an enmity. In the contrary, I had talking to the Iranian people. They asked me why Israel doesn't come to help the Iranians to overthrow this regime. They said that Cyrus the Great has helped the Jews to go back to their country and to rebuild the Holy Land and the Holy Temple, And so you owe us, you, the Israelis, the Jews, you owe us something, and it's time we need your help. Please come and help us. To summarize, not only the Iranians don't hate Israel, but they need our help and they ask for the help, but it may happen only after the toppling of the existing regime in Iran. There was a clash between Israel and the United States during Obama's administration. Democrats that believed that there is a chance to get close to the Iranians and to encourage them to change their positions, which was a very innocent belief, that they didn't get it. So Obama was very kind to the Iranian regime, and the consequences was the contrary. Not only the Iranians didn't change their behavior, they came much harsher and harder and more extremist. So Trump's administration came and changed totally the behavior towards Iran. And he got a very harsh and suppressive actions about Iran, which includes going back from the nuclear contract, putting back the sanctions against the regime in Iran, and it was very useful. We don't see it. Still, Iran is continuing its aggressive actions in the other countries, but because they don't have enough money, these actions and this kind of intervention in the other countries is going down. And the American administration, Pompeo and the others, believe, and it's correct in my eyes, that there is no chance to change or to improve the behavior of the regime today in Iran, but only they have to continue the pressure, the sanctions, and all the diplomatic suppressions against the regime in Iran to bring into toppling of the regime, and maybe to pave the way for a nationalistic regime in Iran which will take care of the Iranian interest and doesn't have any external military ambitions. So as long as the Trump's administration continues, this policy, which is very positive in my eyes, will continue. But if Democrats will win the elections in the United States, there is to continue the friendly position and activity towards the Iranian regime, which may have very negative consequences in the region. I believe that the American sanctions are working, and as the time goes, it may work much better. Iran, for the financing the intervention in the neighboring countries, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Bahrain, and other countries, needs a lot of money, and also a lot of money for nuclear projects and missile projects. It's billions and billions of dollars. When there are sanctions, which means the Iranian income will cease, will stop, they will not have money for this kind of actions. So what will they do? They may stop it, they may take the money they dedicated for the comfort of their country's people to their military aims and religious and propaganda aims, to send it abroad. But anyhow, if they have more money, they will expend more money for intervention and the suppression of the people. They have less money, there is a good chance to damage this kind of effort and to oblige the Iranian regime to stop or to diminish these kind of actions. We see the effect of sanctions in North Korea. Agree with you that sanctions upon North Korea will not be so useful. But Iran is in a different position, and losing the sources of their money means decreasing their intervention and provocative actions abroad, and it means more delay in their military missile project or military nuclear project. So I believe that the sanctions have been very useful, and it damages somehow also the Iranian people, but it may oblige the regime in Iran to change its way, and we already see the first signs that many people inside the leadership in Iran are coming into this kind of conclusions. There is a big debate inside Iran which existed for the last 5, 6, 10 years, whether Iran can do without this support and friendship with the United States, or by the enmity and the aggression and confrontation with the United States. This is a debate, ongoing debate inside Iran, which will continue, and it may increase once the Iranian source of money is going down and down. The Iranian government is trying to cover up the facts about corona, the widespread disaster called corona. And they claim that it was the United States who did it. It's a handmade virus, and Americans have done it to destroy the Iranian economy. The others say that the Jews have been done it. The others say that Satan was the main source. And Ali Khamenei, the leader, the religious leader of Iran, says that's true. Coronavirus is a dangerous thing that killed 1 million people all over the world. He made a mistake. He said 1 million have been died over the world. But what's the importance? In the First and Second World War, there have been 16 million people killed. So what is 1 million? What's the importance of 1 million? Of course, he made a mistake also about the casualties of the two wars. And I explained later in my radio that in Second World War, there have been 740 million casualties, 20 million military, and 54 million civilians. And in the First World War, there have been 14 million killed. It means that 111 million people have been killed in two wars, and Khamenei claimed that it was only 16 million. So, to summarize, the Iranian government tries to diminish the danger and to cover up the facts, to make fake news about it, and to claim that they have been doing a good work. So this kind of approaching the problem causes the Iranian people not to be aware totally to the dimensions of this disaster. So you see that the Iranians, knowing the danger, they neglect it. They go out, they travel to the other cities and so on. And that's the reason that the Iranians contaminated. The real number is much, much bigger than what is declared in Iran. And that's the reason that the number of dead in Iran is relatively big. It's not as high as in Italy or Spain, but it's very high. And actions and the approach of the government caused the neglect of the people themselves, and it's very unhappy. Whether there is a peaceful transition between the religious regime today is more a secular regime. There have been reformists in Iran during many years who tried to change the religious aspect of the regime, but to turn it into more liberal regime. They didn't succeed. And those who govern the Iranian people, they are afraid that if they go even a little bit down from their strategy and their religious belief and their ideology, it will pave the way. It will be the beginning of toppling the regime. So they keep to be much extremist, much harder, and every day they become more so. And there is no chance of changing the regime. There is no chance of the peaceful transition between the actual religious regime to a liberal regime. But you can ask if that's the situation. The only way is armed uprising. I hope that it will not happen in Iran. We don't forget the experience of Syria with 400,000 killed, and they may be the same in Iran, even worse. So I don't have the solution. In one way, I say that there is no peaceful transition, and on the same time, I say that armed uprising will be very deathful and bloodshed. The lack of leadership is the main reason that the Iranians don't dare to uprise and to topple the actual regime. And the regime knows about it, is very much aware of. And that's the reason that during the last 41 years, the regime suppressed the people, killed anybody who was a danger for them, who may be considered as the leader for changing the regime or toppling the actual government. And outside Iran, we don't see any serious alternative leadership for the country. And there are many reasons, because the Iranians are divided upon whether to bring back the kingdom which was toppled, or they have to use the democratic republic, or they have to go to a kind of federalism. And there are also other kinds of regimes. I would say that if we try to look for potential leader for the Iranian in future, Reza Pahlavi is the most popular and most successful potential leader. But there are two problems. First, that Reza Pahlavi is not really active for gaining this aim. During the Iranian protests that we have been witnessed during the last 2-3 years, there have been many slogans heard, Reza Shah, Ruhat Shah, and calling Reza Pahlavi to come back to Iran and to take over the leadership. But the problem is that Reza Pahlavi believes that he doesn't have to lead the people to the revolution, but the people have to make the revolution, and after that to invite him to come back to Iran and to lead the country, which it's very difficult to think about that it may happen. The other difficulty and problem is the character, the nature of the Iranians, at least those who are abroad, that everybody looks at himself as a potential leader of Iran. I used to say in several occasions that the Iranian opposition outside the countries, you have many, many commanders, but no soldiers. Everybody wants to be in command. And it doesn't help, because once Reza Pahlavi tries to gather all of them close to him, if he doesn't choose this one, and he prefers the other one to be his assistant or his advisor, all the others leave him. because all of them want to be assistants and to be in high position. There is no cooperation, there is no interaction. There are many opposition groups. Most of them are fighting one against the other, and Iran is not an exception in this regard. We have seen the same situation in Iraqi opposition, in Syrian opposition, and the opposition in other countries. There is no a united action and united leadership, and Reza Pahlavi didn't succeed, or maybe he doesn't do the necessary effort to bring all of them together. He has tried many times, not very hardly, but never he succeeded. Today, there is no a united opposition against the religious regime inside Iran. Thank you. It was a pleasure for me to be with you, to explain to you and to answer your questions. They have been very good questions, and maybe we shall meet again. Bye-bye.